Hello YouTube, it's the Janky Commander. Today we going over Torbran, Thane of Redfell. He's a 2/4 Dwarf Noble for 1 colorless and 3 red mana with if a red source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, deals that much damage plus 2 instead. So he adds an additional 2 damage to every red source we control dealing damage. For the land base, we have 25 basic mountains. And then for the rest is non-basics. We have Forgotten Caves, which can cycle for a red for more card draw. Temple of the False Gods, so we can ramp, because we are a very mana-hungry deck. Dwarven Mine, just for fun, because if we have 3 or more mountains, which is very likely, it enters untapped and we make a 1/1 red dwarf token. Reliquary Tower, in case we run out of mana to make plays, we can always keep getting, we don't have to discard, we can keep cards in hand. Castle Embrith gives our creatures +1/+0 until end of turn if we want. Otherwise, it just adds red. Rogue's Passage, because we have a few creatures we want to hit our opponents, and this helps get them through. Smoldering Crater, another land that can cycle for card draw. Spinerock Knoll, our hideaway land, that if an opponent has taken 7 or more damage, we can play the Hidden Away card for 1 red. It's not too hard to get that 7 or more damage to an opponent with this deck. We have Handwear Battlements to give creatures we control haste. We don't run the Handwear Garrison though, because the flip side makes colorless, and we'd rather be making red tokens. We have Karn's Bastion to proliferate to help with our planeswalkers we have. And our last land, Nykthos Shrine to Nyx. Tap 2, choose a color, add that much mana to your mana pool equal to your devotion to that color. That is all our lands. We have a lot of permanents, so that's why the Nykthos makes it in. Now we'll go into our planeswalkers. We have Chandra, Fire of Kaladesh. This is the flip planeswalker. Anytime you cast a red spell, untap her. She has tap, deal 1 damage to target player. If she's dealt 3 or more damage this way, dealt 3 or more damage this turn, exile her, return her to the battlefield under its owner's control transformed. And she transforms into Chandra, the Roaring Flame. Uptick for 1, deal 2 damage to target player. -2, deal 2 damage to target creature. Or, my personal favorite, -7, deal 6 damage to each opponent. Each opponent dealt damage this way gets an emblem with, at the beginning of your upkeep, it deals 3 damage to you. Very important to note, emblems are not colored. So Torbran and other effects that add additional damage do not add damage, unless they say all damage dealt is doubled. The rest of our planeswalkers will just go on with the Chandras. Chandra, the Awakened Inferno, can't be countered. We're running her mostly for her uptick of 2, which is each opponent gets an emblem with, at the beginning of your upkeep, deal 1 damage to you. That's really big because the longer she stays out, the more damage our opponents take during their upkeep, and they stay around even when we're gone. Her -3 is deal 3 damage to each non-elemental, not that relevant. -X is deal X damage to target creature or planeswalker. If a permanent dealt damage this turn would die. or if a permanent dealt damage this way would die this turn, exile it instead. So a little bit of spot removal. Next up, Chandra, Fire Artisan. Whenever one or more loyalty counters are removed from her, she deals that much damage to her opponent or planeswalker. So when she ults, she deals 7 damage to target opponent or planeswalker. Her +1 is exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. So it helps us get mana if we need mana, or helps us play spells that we wouldn't have access to till next turn or the next time we draw. Her -7 is the same thing, except instead of 1 card, it's 7 cards. Very fun card. And our last Shondra is Chandra Flamecaller. Uptick, put 2 3/1 elemental creature tokens with haste onto the battlefield, exile them at the beginning of the next end step. Pretty good. Her -0 is what we really want. Discard all cards in your hand, draw that many +1. On an empty hand, we get to draw at least 1 card. If we have a bunch of dead cards, we can discard them, draw that many, and +1 for 0 uptick. Seems really good. And -X is she deals X damage to each creature, which is another really good ability. We have 3 more planeswalkers. We have Jaya, the Venerated Fire Mage. If a red source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, deals that much damage to that permanent or player +1 instead. -2, deal 2 damage to any target. So she says if another, so she can only deal the 2. She has a similar ability to Torbran, except Torbran is every red source, Jaya is every other red source. So she helps tack on more damage. We have Tybalt, the Rakish Instigator, to stop our opponents from gaining life. And we can make a 1/1 Red Devil token with when it dies, it deals 1 damage to any target for -2. And our last planeswalker is my personal favorite in the deck, Sarkhan the Masterless. His static ability is when a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, each dragon you control deals 1 damage to that creature. So anytime something attacks, if Torbran's out, each dragon's dealing 3 damage. His uptick is until end of turn. Each planeswalker becomes a 4/4 red dragon with flying until end of turn. His -3 is make a 4/4 red flying creature dragon creature token. So usually when he comes down, you -3, then you start upticking. He can turn himself into a 4/4, turn all our other planeswalkers into 4/4s, help give us beat sticks. Next, we go into enchantments. Burning Earth. 4 mana, whenever a player taps a non-basic land for mana, it deals 1 damage. Very good card because a lot of players play a lot of non-basics. So this makes them think twice, because with Torbran, you tap that land, you're getting lightning bolted. Very, very good card. And then the other version of Burning Earth, Mana Barbs. Now this is the same thing except for when a player taps a land for mana. Not just a non-basic, any land. So every time our opponents are tapping a land with Torbran out, they're getting lightning bolted. Pretty nasty, but really fun combo. Next up, Oppo Siege. You can either choose cons or dragons for it. Cons, at the beginning of upkeep, exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play that card. So you can play lands if it's a land that's exiled. And then dragons is whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. For the most part, we're usually going to be playing cons because red doesn't have a ton of cheap card draw in terms of repeatable draw for low mana costs, or even price-wise for that matter. So this helps get us additional cards to draw. Next up, we have Sulfuric Vortex. Players can't gain life. Then at the beginning of each player's upkeep, it deals 2 damage. So this helps stop our opponents gaining life. And also, yeah, it hurts us, but our opponents take 4 if Torbran's out. So, fun little card. Next up, Goblin Bombardment. You can sack a creature. It deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Torbran makes it 3. This whole deck revolves around Torbran, and so a lot of the cards are dealing damage to everyone. Next up, another really good card, Spell Shock. Whenever any player successfully, keyword successfully, the spell has to resolve for Spell Shock to trigger. Spell Shock deals 2 damage to him or her. Yeah, this hurts us, but it also hurts our opponents, and a lot more with Torbran. Next up, Furnace of Wrath. Double all damage assigned to any creature or player. And then, of course, another version of that is Dictate of the Twin Gods with Flash. If a source would deal damage to a permanent or player, deals double instead. So, extra damage seems good. Makes that 2 damage from Torbran into 4. Next up, a little wonky card, War's Toll. If an opponent taps a land for mana, that player taps all lands, or tap all lands they control. So basically, it prevents people from playing at instant speed stuff for the most part. And then if a creature an opponent controls attacks, all creatures must attack if able. So kind of forces them to choose, do they want to keep up blockers or do they want to attack? Because it forces everything to attack and everything to block. Next up, Tectonic Reformation. Makes all our lands cycle for a red, or it can cycle for 2. Underrated card, in my opinion, because it turns all our lands into ways to draw extra cards. Next up, Blood Moon, because we need all our opponents to be on the same level as us. Their non-basics are now only mountains. So, fetch lands, mountain. Shock lands, mountain. Your Nykthos, mountains. This hurts us a little bit, but it doesn't hurt a ton. Yeah, a few of our lands we'd rather have is what they are, but turning them into just a mountain, not that hard for us since we're only red. Next up, Leyline of Combustion. If it's in your opening hand, you get to start it with it on the battlefield instead. Then whenever you and or at least one permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or an ability an opponent controls, this deals 2 damage to that player. So if our opponents target us with, say, Factor Fiction, they get hit for 2 damage. And one of our best cards in the deck, Pyrohemia. At the end of turn, if no creatures are in play, sack Pyrohemia. For 1 red, it deals 1 damage to each creature and each player. So this combos really well with Torbran, and another card I'll show you in a second. The card that it combos with really, really well is called Mage Bane Armor. Equipped creature gets +2/+4 and loses flying. Okay, whatever. We run it for its second ability. Prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to equipped creature. As long as this card's out on Torbran and we have Pyrohemia, all our lands become lightning bolts to creatures and players that aren't us. We take 1 damage, opponent takes 3. Our creatures take 1 except for Torbran, opponent's creatures take 3. Next up, we will continue with the rest of the artifacts. Soul Ring, add 2 mana. because it's a red deck. Ruby Medallion makes our red spells cost 1 less to cast because we're red. Elixir of Immortality, try to put into every deck I have because for 2 mana, gain 5 life, shuffle it and your graveyard into your library. Seems pretty powerful. And you know, if you start getting low on cards, play that, get 5 life and your graveyard back in. Good trade-off. Next up, another favorite card of mine, Nyx Lotus, enters tapped. It's Nykthos on an artifact. You tap, choose a color, add an amount of mana of the color equal to your devotion. It helps to give us the mana we need for Pyrohemia. Next up, another card I'm really fond of now is Bag of Holding. If you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard. Underneath this, you can pay 2 to loot, pay 4, sacrifice it, return all exiled cards with Bag of Holding to their owner's hand. So if we get hit with a Wheel of Fortune effect, we put all of our hand underneath Bag of Holding instead of the grave and can get that back for 4 mana at any time. Really good card. Next up, Cage Sun. We choose red. Red creatures get +1/+1. And a land that adds 1 or more mana of the chosen type adds that much +1. So you can choose any color, but you're going to choose red because you're playing mono red. Next up, Cold Steel Heart. Yeah, enters, choose red, can tap to add a red. Enters tapped, whatever. Next up, Wayfarer's Bauble. Gets us a basic land into play tapped for 2 mana. Helps us ramp up. Expedition Map. Pay 2, search your library for a land, put it into hand. After you reveal it, then shuffle your library. Helps us find Nykthos if we need Nykthos, or just helps us deck thin if we have all the lands we really want. And our last artifact, Chandra's Regulator. Really underestimated, undervalued, underappreciated card in my opinion. Has the ability of, if you activate a loyalty ability of a Chandra Planeswalker, you may pay 1. If you do copy it, choose new targets for the copy. So when we ultimate some of our Chandras, or even uptaking them, if they give emblems and we pay 1, it happens twice. They get 2 emblems. It's pretty busted, but they don't get the counters as if they activated it. They just get the second ability. And then its other ability is pay 1, discard a mountain or a red card to draw a card. So it's looting either a red card or a land to get a card. Next up, creatures. Siege Gang Commander. Create 3/1/1 red goblins when it enters. Pay 2, sack a goblin. It deals 2 damage to any target. So it can sack itself, deal 2 damage. Can become 4 with Torbran. Next up, Fanatic of Magus. ETBs deals damage equal to the devotion of red to each opponent. So if we have a really high devotion to red, deals a lot of damage. Next up, Thermal Alchemist. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, we may untap Thermal Alchemist, tap, deal 1 damage to each opponent. He's in here because he pings every opponent and he can untap pretty quickly. Next up, a really fun card that I enjoyed, and I'm really glad I got a reprint in Mystery Boosters. Stigma Lasher. 2/2 for 2 with Wither. And when it deals damage to a player, that player can't gain life for the rest of the game. It's pretty dumb. If we connect with an opponent, they can't gain life for the entire rest of the game. Gives them an emblem. It's pretty dumb. So if we start, that's one of the cards that we want to connect with, because then it doesn't matter if they try and gain life. the emblem that it gives them, no life gain. Next up, Scab Clan Berserker, haste, renown 1. If it deals combat damage to a player and isn't renowned, put a 1/1 counter on it, it becomes renowned. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, if it's renowned, it deals 2 damage to that player. So another card to help get damage in on our opponents. Next up, Ember Maw Hellion. Trample, if another red source you control would deal damage to a permanent player, deals that much damage plus 1 instead. Another Jaya Venerated Fire Mage effect. This time on a creature. Next up, Atali the Primal Storm. This is another really fun card because when it attacks, exile the top card of each player's library. You may cast any number of non-land cards exiled this way without paying their mana costs. You don't really want this guy to die. So, and we keep swinging. We get to exile. We get to play 4 spells for free, hopefully. Pretty fun. Next up, Runaway Steamkin. When we cast a red spell, if it has fewer than 3 1/1 counters, put a 1/1 counter on it. Remove 3 1/1 counters, add 3 red to your mana pool. Easy way to get more mana every time we cast a red spell. Very fun card. Next up, Drakuseth, Maw of Flames. Flying Dragon, 7/7 for 7. When it attacks, it deals 4 damage to any target and 3 damage to each of up to 2 other targets. So it gets to deal a total of 10 damage divided among 3 things when it attacks. And then it also has a 7/7 body in the air to go on top of it. Really good card, especially with Torbran or a damage doubler out. Pretty fun. Next up, Bonecrusher Giant. Instant adventure is Stomp for 2 mana. Damage can't be prevented this turn. Then it deals 2 damage to any target. So you can't prevent the damage. Then it deals 2 damage to something. Helps kill things. And that prevents damage. Or damage can't be prevented, stops things like Fog Bank, Guard Gomazoa, things that prevent all damage dealt to them. It stops that, which is pretty nice. And then its ability as a creature is when it becomes a target of a spell or ability, it deals 2 damage to that spell's controller. We don't target a lot of our creatures, but this, if they want to remove it with a spell, they're taking 2 damage to do so. Next up, Tectonic Giant. Whenever it attacks or becomes the target of a spell an opponent controls, we can either deal 3 damage to each opponent, which is generally what we're going to do 99% of the time, or we can exile the top 2 cards of our library, choose one until end of our next turn, we may play that card. Next up, Burnished Heart. 3, go get 2 basic lands into play tapped, sacrificing it, just mana ramp. Next up, Soulscar Mage, really good card. If a source we control would deal damage, non-combat damage, to be specific, to a creature an opponent controls, put that many -1/-1 counters on that creature instead. Gets rid of hexproof, gets rid of indestructible, gets rid of gods and all that. Really good card. The fact that it turns all damage into all of our spell damage into wither damage. Next up, Harsh Mentor. If an opponent activates an ability of an artifact, creature, or land that isn't a mana ability, it deals 2 damage to that player. More kind of punishing things for our opponents. Next up, Inferno Titan. When he ETBs or attacks, deal 3 damage divided as you choose among 1, 2, or 3 targets. With Torbran, it says Lightning Bolt 3 different things, which is pretty nice. Or deal 5 to one thing. So you can deal a total of 9, 7, or 5 damage, depending on how you want to change the damage. Next up, Sin Prodder Menace. At the beginning of our upkeep, we reveal the top card of our library. Any opponent may pay the card, or may have Sin Prodder deal that much damage equal to the converted mana cost of the card. Otherwise, we put that card into our hand. So it's a reverse. It's a little bit of a reverse Dark Tutelage, or the creature version. Bob, I think, is his name. The one that you reveal it, you take damage, you put equal to its CMC, you put it in hand. This lets our opponent choose to take it, or it just goes into hand. They can stop us from getting lands by paying 0 life and getting it in, or going to the graveyard, but otherwise, pretty good. Next up, Viashino Heretic. We may pay 2 and tap, destroy an artifact. It deals that much damage equal to the artifact's CMC to the artifact's controller. If our opponent has a pesky artifact on the battlefield, pay 2, destroy it, and hit them for the CMC. Pretty fun. Last creature, Zozu the Punisher. Really, really mean card, because every time a land comes into play, Zozu deals 2 damage to that land's controller. Shuts down Scapeshift decks in a roundabout way, because every time they Scapeshift, they're going to take 2 damage for each land coming into play. So it hurts them, but it is symmetrical, like a lot of effects in this deck. Next up, we will go to the sorceries. Disrupt Decorum. Go to all creatures you don't control. Another really fun card to use, because every creature has to attack in the next attack each combat if able, and attacks a player other than you if able. So this can save us if, we're about to die. We make our opponent's creatures attack other things. Insult to Injury. Insult deals doubles all damage until end of turn, but first damage can't be prevented this turn. And then Injury, you can only cast it from your graveyard. Deal 2 damage to target creature or player, 2 damage to target creature and 2 damage to target player. Only really running it for its insult, because that's the good part. Next up, Faithless Looting. Draw 2, discard 2 with flashback. More card draw. Underworld Fires is an interesting card on testing. For 2 mana, you get to deal 1 damage to each creature and planeswalker. If a permanent dealt damage this way would die, exile it instead, or die this turn. So exiles tokens, exiles some small commanders, but helps get rid of a lot of our opponent's things while leaving our stuff relatively unharmed. Next up, Hour of Devastation. All creatures lose indestructible until end of turn. It deals 5 damage to each creature and each non-bolus planeswalker. A little board wipe. You could replace that with Blasphemous Act or the Underworld Fires, for 13 damage, but it doesn't lose indestructible. Next up, Molten Disaster. You can kick it to give the card Split Second, which, as long as it's on the stack and it has Split Second, players can't play spells or activate activated abilities that aren't mana abilities, except for Morphs, because Morph is a special action, and I don't want to get into the rules of how Morphs work, but they can respond to this, and there are a few other cards that can. But usually we're casting this, we're kicking it, deals X damage to each creature without flying in each player. Help kill our opponents and board wipe at the same time. Next 2 cards, Cathartic Reunion, discard 2, draw 3, and Tormenting Voices, discard 1, draw 2. More card draw for us. And then into the last, our 3 instants. Thrill of Possibility is basically Tormenting Voices, but at instant speed, get to discard a card, draw 2. Chaos Warp, our only way of dealing with enchantments. And it doesn't destroy, but it shuffles a permanent into its owner's library, then reveal the top card of their library. If it's permanent, they put it onto the battlefield. Really risky, but sometimes if we just got to get rid of an enchantment or even an artifact, we use this to get rid of it. And hopefully they get something worse than what was out, like maybe a land, or maybe they don't reveal a permanent and they reveal a instant or sorcery instead, where it just stays. Final card of the deck, Comet Storm. Multi-kick 1, choose target creature or player, then choose another target creature or player for each time Comet Storm was kicked. Deal X damage to each of them. This is better than Fireball because it doesn't have the damage of X. It keeps X as its normal value. This helps kill our opponents as well by dealing damage to them. Or if we need to board wipe creatures, use it to board wipe creatures. But that, my friends, is my Torbran EDH deck. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know what you think of the deck. Is it good? Is it bad? Is there any cards that I should add? Any cards that I should remove from the deck? Let me know in the comments down below.